I felt my body collapse before Shabbat. Darkness swallowed me, yet I was not there. I was somewhere else, hovering above the paramedics, frantically trying to bring me back. I could hear their voices, but I was silent. And then I saw him.
Welcome to today's special episode, where we dive into a story that will challenge everything you think you know about faith, belief, and transformation. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Rabbi David Cohen. Rabbi Cohen has lived a life steeped in Jewish tradition, devotion, and study. But his life took a shocking turn when a near-death experience turned everything he believed upside down. Rabbi Cohen, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's not easy to share what happened, but it's important. My name is Rabbi David Cohen, and I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. For over 2 decades, I've served as a rabbi, leading my community in worship, teaching the Torah, and guiding families through life's biggest moments. My life was dedicated to God and His commandments. I never doubted that.
That sounds like a life built on certainty, a rock-solid foundation. But I know things changed for you one fateful evening. Can you walk us through what happened, Rabbi? How did everything shift so suddenly?
It was a Thursday evening, just before Shabbat. I had finished a long day of counseling a young couple and was heading home to prepare my sermon. I felt fine at first, just the usual pressure before Shabbat, trying to get everything in order. But then it hit me. A tightness in my chest, at first faint, then sharp. I thought it was nothing, just stress, maybe indigestion, but it didn't stop. It spread up my arm, down my chest. I couldn't breathe properly. And then my vision blurred. I collapsed.
That must have been terrifying, Rabbi. Were you aware of what was happening? Was there any moment where you thought, this is it, that you might not make it?
Yes. I remember thinking, it can't be. I'm only 52. I'm healthy. But the pain kept getting worse, and I couldn't fight it. When Miriam came into the room, she saw the panic in my eyes. I remember her face, her shock, the way she rushed to grab the phone and call for help. But I didn't feel the fear anymore. Not for myself. I was slipping away. My body was shutting down, but I was still aware. Something strange happened. I felt a pull, a shift, as if I was being drawn away from everything I knew.
Wait, what do you mean by being drawn away? Rabbi Cohen, you've mentioned that you felt like you were being pulled away. I think listeners are on the edge of their seats. What happened next? Was this the beginning of something more than just a near-death experience?
I was aware, but not fully present. I felt detached, like I was floating just above the scene in the synagogue. It was surreal, watching my own body on the floor, still and lifeless. The paramedics moved quickly, their faces a blur as they worked to bring me back. Their hands were firm as they pressed against my chest, the rhythmic compressions sending jolts through my body that I couldn't feel. But I saw it. I could see everything happening, everything they were doing to try to save me. I wanted to scream, to tell them I was still here, but no sound came. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. It was as if I was a spectator in my own death, helpless to intervene in a reality that no longer belonged to me. The paramedics shouted instructions to each other, their voices muffled as if I were underwater. I could hear Miriam in the background, her voice trembling as she prayed, her hands pressed tightly together. But I couldn't reach her. I couldn't tell her I was okay, that I wasn't gone. The pain in my chest was gone, replaced by an unsettling quiet. I felt nothing, yet I knew everything. There was no fear, no panic, only confusion and an odd sense of peace. I was still here, but I wasn't. I had crossed over, yet I hadn't fully let go. I watched them as they used the defibrillator pads. My body jolted violently in response, but I couldn't feel it. I watched my own lifeless form as they tried to revive me, but it felt like I was no longer a part of that body. Suddenly, the room around me seemed to lose its focus. The urgency, the lights, the voices all began to fade as I felt myself being drawn somewhere beyond this world. What was happening to me? Where was I going? And why couldn't I stop myself from moving forward? As the scene in the synagogue continued to blur, I felt myself being pulled, gently but irresistibly, away from my body. The sounds of the paramedics, Miriam's frantic whispers, all began to fade like a distant echo. It was as if I was moving through a tunnel, not physically, but in a way that felt more like a shift in awareness. I wasn't falling, I wasn't flying, I was simply moving away. And the deeper I drifted, the less real the world behind me felt. It wasn't just the sounds that diminished, it was the sense of space, the weight of the world, the room, the people, even my body, all became irrelevant. What replaced it was a light, but not the light of a lamp or a star. It wasn't bright in a way I could describe with earthly terms, but it was alive, and it enveloped me with a warmth so profound that I felt it in every part of my being. I couldn't see it, I could feel it, as if the light was both all around me and inside me at the same time. It didn't hurt, it didn't blind, it was just there, wrapping me in a peace I had never known. There was no fear, no pain. I didn't even think about my body or Miriam or the world that I had left behind. I simply existed, free from the weight of everything I had carried in life. For the first time, there was nothing to prove, nothing to hold on to. There was only this presence, this sense of complete acceptance. I felt the light pull me further, urging me onward, as though it was calling me not to a place, but to something deeper, something more. What was this place? What was I being called to? And why did it feel so familiar, yet so utterly beyond my understanding? The light wasn't just around me, it was within me. I could feel it in every part of my being, a warmth that filled the empty spaces I didn't even know existed. It wasn't a blinding light. It didn't force me to look away. It was just there, surrounding me in a way that felt both comforting and vast, like I was floating in the center of something alive. This wasn't a light I had ever seen before. It wasn't like the sun, the stars, or even a candle. It wasn't something that belonged to this world. And yet, somehow, I knew it was good. It wasn't just light. It was alive, pulsing with a presence that felt both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. The deeper I moved into it, the more I felt as though I was being pulled into its very essence. It wasn't just a presence. It was an invitation, a call, a beckoning that stirred something within me I couldn't name. It felt like home, but not in the way I had ever experienced on earth. This wasn't just a place. It was more than that. It was an experience, an overwhelming sense of being understood, being known in a way that I had never felt before. I felt no fear, no hesitation, only an overwhelming desire to move closer to it, as if this light, this presence, was the very answer I had been searching for my entire life. It wasn't until I was fully immersed in it that I realized this was God. The God I had spent my entire life seeking, studying, and teaching. But this wasn't the distant God I had always believed in. This was something more personal, intimate, and yet far beyond anything I had ever known. Who was this presence calling me closer? And what was I meant to learn here, in this place of perfect light and peace? As I stood in the midst of this overwhelming light, a new feeling washed over me: recognition. I couldn't explain how, but I knew this wasn't just a force of nature or an impersonal power. This was something, or rather, someone. The warmth I felt deep inside me was not just warmth. It was a presence, a being, and the more I allowed myself to drift closer, the more I began to feel known by this presence.
Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, a voice spoke. Not aloud, but in my soul. The sound of it was soft, yet unmistakable, powerful in its gentleness. The voice said one name, one word that resonated deeply within me: Jesus. It didn't come as a shock at first. I didn't fight it or reject it, but it felt like a sudden realization that hit me with a quiet force. Jesus. The name echoed within me, and at that moment I wasn't afraid. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even confused. There was just a sense of knowing, a certainty deep in my heart. And as much as I tried to resist the thought, there was no denying what I was now encountering. I had spent my whole life rejecting the notion that Jesus was anything more than a historical figure, someone who would become the foundation of a faith I could never understand. To me, he was simply a Jewish teacher whose mission had been misinterpreted by those who followed him. Yet now, standing in this light and hearing that name, I felt something profound stir inside me. The voice wasn't condemning me. It wasn't angry at me. It wasn't telling me I was wrong. It was inviting me closer, as if to understand. What was this connection to Jesus, and why did it feel like the missing piece of something I had spent my entire life seeking? The moment the name Jesus echoed within me, I felt a shift, a ripple through my very soul. I'd read about him, studied his life through the lens of the Torah, but this was different. It was one thing to analyze, to debate, and to view him from a distance, but here, in this place, in the overwhelming presence of this light, the distance was gone. Jesus was not a mere figure from history. He was standing here, alive in a way I couldn't fully comprehend. A sudden clarity washed over me, and I knew this was not just a man. This was the fulfillment of everything I had been taught, yet never understood. The prophecies I'd studied, the verses I had memorized, they had all pointed to him. How had I missed this? How had I spent my life devoted to the Torah, believing that I understood it completely, and yet never saw him standing at the heart of it all? The realization was crushing. The weight of it pressed down on me like a heavy stone in my chest. Jesus was not the failure that I had believed him to be. He was not the one who had misled millions. He was not the false Messiah that I had once dismissed. He was the very fulfillment of the Torah, the living embodiment of every promise, every prophecy I had once read with only half an understanding. And yet, despite the overwhelming sense of truth that surrounded him, I found myself recoiling. Why had I never seen this before? Why had I been so sure of my own understanding when this truth had been before me all along? The feeling was humbling, disorienting, but there was no room for denial now. The presence of Jesus was undeniable. Was this divine revelation the end of my journey, or the beginning of a new path, one that would forever change everything I had believed? The weight of the revelation pressed heavily on my heart. I had spent my entire life studying the Torah, a lifetime of devotion to what I believed to be the ultimate truth. I had never wavered in my faith, never questioned the path I was walking. But standing here, in the presence of this light, this person, I felt as though my understanding of everything had been flipped upside down. How had I never seen it before? How had I spent decades teaching others about the sacred words of the Torah without recognizing the truth woven throughout it? I thought back to the prophecies of the Messiah, those very words that I'd pored over, those promises that had always seemed so distant and abstract. Could they have been pointing to Jesus all along? The realization was like a puzzle piece clicking into place, but it also felt like a slap in the face. I had been blind. I had spent my life waiting for something else, someone else, and here he was, standing before me. "David," the voice spoke again, not harshly, but with an unmistakable authority. "You have studied the law. You have taught others to follow it, but the law was never the destination. It was the road that led to me." His words reverberated within me. They were not condemning, but they cut deep. I had loved God, served Him, and taught His word with all my heart, and yet I had missed the one thing that mattered most. It wasn't the law that brought me to Him, it was His grace. The truth I had spent my life seeking wasn't something I could earn or achieve, it was a relationship, a person. I wanted to speak, to argue, to ask questions, but all I could feel was the weight of my own ignorance, the magnitude of what I had been blind to for so long. Could I really accept this? Could I accept Jesus as the fulfillment of everything I had believed? Or was my entire faith built on something that no longer made sense? The presence around me seemed to pulse with life, as though the very air I breathed was infused with meaning. The voice, Jesus' voice, spoke again, this time with a tenderness that broke through the confusion in my heart. "David, you have sought God with all your heart, but you have not understood the fullness of His plan. You've walked the path, but you've never reached the destination." The words struck me like a blow to the chest, leaving me breathless, yet not in fear. There was no anger in his voice, no condemnation. It was as if he had known me all along, knew the depth of my devotion, my struggle, my blind spots, and yet he wasn't here to reprimand me. He was here to reveal something far greater. I felt a sense of peace wash over me, but it was not a peace that allowed me to stay where I was. It was a peace that invited me forward, into a deeper truth I had never imagined.
"You have spent your life following the law, David, but the law was always pointing to me." The weight of his words settled deep inside me. I had lived for the commandments, the rituals, the traditions, and yet I had missed the very one they had been preparing me for. I wanted to resist, to argue. I had built my life on these principles, on the conviction that obedience to the law was the path to righteousness. But in that moment, I knew this wasn't about law or obedience. This was about a relationship, a connection, a fulfillment of all the promises I had held dear. The more he spoke, the more my walls began to crumble. I had believed in the God of Israel, but now I was face to face with God's Son, the fulfillment of everything I had been searching for. How could I reconcile everything I had believed with what he was showing me? Could this be the truth I had always longed for, or was I losing everything? As Jesus spoke, I felt my mind opening, like a door unlocking to a world I had always been taught to understand but had never truly seen. He began to show me something, visions of Scripture coming alive, like living prophecies unfolding before my eyes. I saw the stories from the Torah, Abraham and Isaac on the mountain, the sacrifice that almost was, and the ram that God provided. I had taught that story countless times, emphasizing Abraham's obedience, his unwavering faith. But now, standing before Jesus, I understood something deeper. This wasn't just a story about faith, it was a foreshadowing. Abraham had taken his son to be sacrificed, but God provided a ram. In the story of Jesus, there was no ram. Jesus, the Son, was the sacrifice. The truth hit me like a wave. This moment in the Torah, the test of Abraham's faith, was pointing directly to the cross. The visions continued. I saw the Israelites in the wilderness, sick from the venomous snakes, crying out for help. Moses lifted the bronze serpent on a pole, and those who looked at it were healed. I'd always read that story as a strange and obscure moment in the history of Israel. But now, standing before Jesus, I saw the connection. Just as Moses lifted the serpent in the wilderness, so too would Jesus be lifted up for the healing of the world. The scriptures were no longer separate stories. They were pieces of a grand divine puzzle. Every story, every prophecy I had studied for years now made sense. Jesus was the fulfillment of them all. Was I finally understanding the fullness of the prophecy, or was there more yet to be revealed? And if Jesus was the fulfillment, what did that mean for me? As the weight of the visions pressed on me, heavier than anything I had ever felt, for years I had studied the Torah, interpreting the stories, explaining the rituals, teaching the law. I thought I understood it. No, I knew I understood it. But now in the presence of Jesus, everything I thought I knew seemed to fall apart. As the visions continued to unfold, I could feel the truth sinking deep into my soul. Everything in me wanted to resist, to cling to the certainty I had built my life on. But there was no denying what I was seeing, no avoiding the undeniable connection between Jesus and the prophecies of the Messiah I had spent my life studying. I felt a deep sorrow, not for myself, but for all the years I had spent so certain in my blindness. I had loved God. I had dedicated my life to Him, studied His words, followed His commandments. And yet I had missed Him. I had missed His Son. Tears began to well up in my eyes as I realized that I had been looking for God my entire life, but I had been searching in the wrong place. I had believed in the covenant, in the promise given to Abraham and Moses, but I had failed to see that the covenant had always pointed forward to Jesus, the fulfillment of everything I had hoped for. There was a deep pain in my chest, not from fear or guilt, but from the weight of truth. All my years of study, my pride and my understanding of the law, it all felt insignificant now. What had I been doing all this time? What had I been teaching, if not the whole truth? Could I accept this truth? Could I let go of everything I had known to embrace this new understanding? And what would it mean for my life moving forward? As I stood there, shaken to my core, something unexpected happened. The presence of Jesus, that overwhelming peace and light, seemed to draw me further into a reality I had only heard of in Scripture. Heaven. I had spent my life studying the texts that described it, but now I was feeling it, experiencing it in a way I could never have imagined. It wasn't a place, not in the way I had always thought. Heaven wasn't some distant realm separated from us by time or space. It wasn't confined by walls or distance. It was a presence, alive and vibrant, filling everything. There was no time here, no before or after, just now. Pure and eternal. I saw people, or rather beings, souls, moving around in harmony. Their faces were radiant with joy, glowing with a light that seemed to come from within them. There was no fear, no tears, no pain, only peace. And it wasn't just the absence of suffering, it was the fullness of life. I could feel the connection between them, the complete unity of purpose. There was no ego, no striving to prove oneself. These souls were whole, not just in body, but in spirit, and they were at peace with each other and with God. It was nothing like the world I had known. And as I watched them, I felt something stir deep inside me, a longing, a desire to be part of this, not to leave the world I had come from, but to be part of this fulfillment. I had always believed in the existence of heaven, but here, standing in its presence, it was more than a belief. It was a reality.
And I realized for the first time this was the life I had always been searching for, not in the rules I followed, but in the relationship with the one who had come to bring this peace. If this was heaven, if this was the fulfillment of everything I had hoped for, what did it mean for the life I had lived? Could I return to the world I knew, or was I being called to something more? As I stood there, bathed in the light of heaven, a deep sense of belonging filled me. It wasn't just a place of peace, it was a place of perfect connection. Every being, every soul was part of a greater whole, and for the first time, I felt complete. There was no need for words, no need for questions, because everything was known, everything was right. And yet, amidst this serenity, something stirred within me, a pull, gentle, yet undeniable. At first, I didn't understand what it was, but the longer I stayed in this place, the more I realized it wasn't the end of my journey. It was the beginning of something far greater. "David," a voice spoke, this time not from outside, but deep within my heart. It was Jesus. His voice was not loud, but it carried an authority that cut through everything else. "You cannot stay here. Your mission is not finished. There is more for you to do." The words stung. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave this peace, this wholeness. But I knew what he was saying was true. I wasn't meant to stay here. Not yet. The longing to remain was overwhelming, but I also knew that I had been given a choice. I had been shown the truth, but I was not being called to simply rest in that truth. I was being called to share it, to return to the world I had once known, and to carry this revelation with me. "Will you return?" he asked me, not with force, but with a quiet, inviting power. "Will you go back to those who need to hear the truth you've found?" Could I leave this perfect peace behind? And if I returned, how would I share this truth that had turned my world upside down? I felt a heavy, almost painful tug in my chest as the light around me began to shift. The warmth that had filled every fiber of my being started to fade, like a flame gradually flickering out. I didn't want to leave. Every part of me ached to stay in this place, this perfect, holy place where there was no pain, no struggle, only peace. But as I stood there, unable to move or speak, I understood this wasn't where I was meant to be, not yet. Jesus' voice echoed in my mind once more, gently urging me to return. "You have seen the truth, David. Now you must share it. Your people need to know." The weight of those words pressed down on me. I had spent my entire life in devotion to the law, to the teachings of the Torah. But now I knew the law was a foundation, a path, but it was never the end. The end was Jesus. He was the fulfillment of everything I had been searching for. And now I had to go back and tell others. But how? How could I explain to my family, to my congregation, what had happened? How could I make them understand that everything I had taught them was incomplete? The very thought filled me with dread. I could already hear their voices, the confusion, the anger, the disbelief. Would they accept what I had learned, or would they cast me aside as a heretic, someone who had strayed too far? But I knew there was no turning back. My life had changed, and I could no longer keep this revelation to myself. I had been shown the truth, and now I had to live it out. How would I explain all this? Could I bear the weight of losing everything I had worked for in order to share the truth of Jesus with those I loved? The journey back was slow, as though the act of returning to my body demanded every ounce of my strength. I felt like I was being pulled through layers of existence, leaving behind the perfect peace of heaven and returning to a world that suddenly seemed dim and chaotic in comparison. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my body, lying in a hospital bed, wires and tubes attached to me, the sterile smell of the room making my head spin. The pain in my chest was sharp now, and the reality of where I was struck me like a slap in the face. Miriam was sitting beside me, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked at me with a mixture of relief and confusion, as if she couldn't fully grasp the fact that I was still alive. Her hands trembled as she held mine. "Miriam," she whispered, her voice a broken prayer, "you're back." I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to speak the words, to share the truth of what had happened, the revelation that had shattered my entire understanding of God and faith. But as I looked at her, the weight of the moment sunk in. How could I explain this to her? How could I tell her that everything we had believed, everything we had built our lives on, was now in question? I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Miriam's eyes searched mine, and I could see the fear, the worry, the hope that maybe I would tell her everything was okay. But it wasn't. Not anymore. "David," she said softly, her voice breaking. "What happened to you? Where did you go?" I took a deep breath, feeling the truth swell in my chest, but I hesitated. The truth was no longer just my own. It belonged to the world now, and I had no idea where to begin. How could I tell her what happened? And if I told her, would she still see me as the man she had always known?
After the silence between Miriam and me stretched for what felt like an eternity, I knew I couldn't avoid it any longer. The truth I had been shown, the revelation that had turned my world upside down, had to be shared, starting with those closest to me. Our children, 3 of them, sat in the corner of the hospital room. They were quiet, their faces unreadable, watching us closely. I had taught them, raised them, shown them the ways of our faith, but I knew that what I was about to tell them would challenge everything they had ever believed. How could I explain this to them? How could I ask them to accept that their father, the rabbi they had looked up to, was now a man who believed in something completely different than they had been taught? I looked at Miriam first. Her eyes were wide, full of unspoken questions. And then my gaze shifted to our children, Samuel, Rachel, and David Jr. They were all grown now, but they had been with me on every step of our faith journey. What would I say to them? I cleared my throat, the words heavy and foreign as they lodged in my chest. "I need to tell you something," I said, my voice shaky. Miriam squeezed my hand, as if to remind me she was there. But this wasn't just about her. It was about all of us. I looked at Samuel first, the oldest, always the one to ask the hard questions. "Dad," said he quietly, his voice laced with uncertainty, "what happened to you? When you were gone, where did you go?" I closed my eyes for a moment, gathering the courage to speak. "I went somewhere beyond this world," I began, my voice trembling. "And what I saw there changed everything I believed." How would they react? Would they understand, or would they reject me as someone who had lost his way? The room was heavy with silence after I spoke. Samuel, Rachel, and David Jr. exchanged uneasy glances. I could see the confusion and disbelief in their eyes. I had taught them, raised them, shown them the ways of our faith, but I knew that what I was about to tell them would challenge everything they had ever believed. Samuel, always the analytical one, was the first to speak. "Dad, what are you saying? Are you telling us that you—" He paused, his voice faltering. "That you believe in Jesus now?" The words hung in the air like a thick fog. Jesus. The name I had rejected all my life, the name I had taught them to reject.
was now at the center of everything I was trying to explain. I nodded, though it felt like my chest was being crushed under the weight of it all. "Yes," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I believe he is the Messiah, the fulfillment of everything we have been taught. The Torah, it all pointed to him." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "But Dad, all our lives, everything we've done has been about the law, about following the commandments. Are you saying it doesn't matter anymore?" Her words cut deep. The law, the commandments, had been my entire life. How could I explain that they still mattered, but they weren't the end? That they were always pointing us forward to something greater, someone greater? I swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. "It matters, Rachel. The law is holy, but Jesus is the fulfillment of it. He is the one who completed the path." David Jr., the youngest, sat quietly. I could see the weight of it all in his expression, the confusion, the hurt, the fear. "Are we supposed to just forget everything we've been taught?" he asked, his voice small. Could I help them understand, or had I lost them forever? Was there any way to bridge the gap between what I had always believed and the truth I now knew? The conversation with my children was difficult, but it was nothing compared to the conversation I knew was coming with Miriam. She had been my partner in everything: our faith, our family, our life together. And now I had to tell her that everything we had built, everything we had believed, was being upended. She sat across from me, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Her eyes were wide, full of both fear and curiosity. For the first time in our marriage, I saw something in her I had never noticed before: uncertainty. Miriam, who had always been my steadfast anchor, was looking at me like she didn't quite know who I was anymore. "I don't know how to explain this to you," I began, my voice shaking. Your face twisted in confusion, and she leaned forward. "What do you mean, David? Are you telling me that you're not the man I married anymore? That all this time we've spent together, in this faith, in our life together, is somehow wrong?" Her voice cracked, and I felt a stab of pain deep in my chest. Miriam was not just questioning me, she was questioning the very foundation of our life together. "No," I said, quickly, almost desperate to reassure her. "Everything we've done has been in love for God, for His people. But what I've seen, what I now understand, Jesus is the fulfillment of everything we have been waiting for." She recoiled, her face pale, as if I had slapped her. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you believe this? Why now?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of it all. "I don't understand it all either, Miriam, but I can't deny it anymore. I met him. He showed me the truth. I know now what I have to do." Could Miriam ever accept this new truth? Or had my revelation torn us apart in a way that could never be healed?
The silence between Miriam and me was deafening. I could feel the gap between us growing wider with every word I spoke. She wasn't rejecting me outright, but the confusion, the fear was evident in the way her hands trembled and her voice cracked. I had always thought that we shared everything, that we would walk through any trial side by side. But this was different. This wasn't just about our marriage, it was about the very core of our faith, the bedrock of everything we had believed in for over 20 years. "I need you to understand," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This isn't about rejecting everything we've known. It's about fulfilling it. Jesus didn't come to destroy the law. We've always believed the Messiah would fulfill the promises. That's what's happening. It's all true, Miriam, every single thing we've waited for." But Miriam shook her head, her lips trembling. "David, I don't understand. How can you suddenly believe this?
You were so sure, so certain. You've spent your whole life teaching our children, leading our synagogue, telling everyone about the Torah, and now you want us to follow Jesus?" Her words cut deeper than I expected. It was as if she were not only questioning my beliefs, but everything we had built together. I had always prided myself on being a leader, a guide to my family and community. But now I felt like a lost child, grasping at something that seemed impossible to explain, even to those I loved the most. "I didn't ask for this, Miriam," I whispered, the pain in my chest raw and real. "I didn't ask for this change, but I can't ignore it anymore. I've seen it, I've felt it, and I know it's the truth." Could Miriam ever find peace with my transformation, or had I lost her faith in me forever? The days that followed were some of the most difficult of my life. Miriam and I hardly spoke beyond the necessities. The tension in the house was palpable, and I could see the doubt in her eyes, the worry on her face. She loved me, I knew that, but how could she reconcile what I had become with the man she had known for all these years? How could I reconcile it with myself? I had seen the truth. I knew that Jesus was the fulfillment of everything the Torah had promised. But even though I now understood it deeply, the weight of sharing this truth with the rest of the world hung over me. My family, my congregation, how would I explain this radical transformation? I had spent my life defending the Torah, teaching it to others, helping others walk in its commandments. Now I had to tell them that Jesus was the fulfillment of all those laws, that the Messiah they were still waiting for had already come. The thought of standing before my congregation, of revealing my change, terrified me. Would they laugh? Would they mock me? Would they cast me out as a heretic, as someone who had betrayed everything I had ever taught? I couldn't stay silent. Jesus hadn't been a figure from history for me anymore. He was real. I had seen him, felt his presence, and the truth of what he had shown me was undeniable. But the weight of sharing this truth with the rest of the world hung over me. My family, my congregation. How would I explain this radical transformation? I had spent my life defending the Torah, teaching it to others, helping others walk in its commandments. Now, I had to tell them that Jesus was the fulfillment of all those laws, that the Messiah they were still waiting for had already come. The afternoon of my speech that day, I couldn't find the storm inside me. My heart raced, my palms were sweating, and every part of me wanted to run, to escape the weight of what I was about to do. But I couldn't. I had been given a truth too great to ignore, and now it was time to share it. I walked into the synagogue that morning, my mind spinning with doubts. The familiar faces of my congregation greeted me with smiles, unaware that their rabbi, the man they had trusted for so long, was about to turn their world upside down. They didn't know that I had come back from death itself, carrying with me a revelation that would challenge everything they believed. As I stood at the front, facing them all, the words felt heavy on my tongue. My eyes scanned the room. Familiar faces, old friends, those I had guided in faith. They were waiting for me to speak, to teach them something new, something meaningful, as I had done so many times before. But this time, the message was not of law, not of commandments or rituals. This time, the message was Jesus. "I have to tell you something," I began, my voice trembling in my chest. "What I'm about to share will challenge everything you've known. It's not an easy truth to accept, but it is the truth I have seen. Jesus is the Messiah. He is the fulfillment of the Torah, of the promises we've waited for. I've seen it, and I cannot deny it anymore." There was a sharp intake of breath from the crowd. Shock, disbelief, and whispers filled the air. My heart pounded in my chest, but I had no choice but to keep going. I couldn't turn back now.
One man in the back stood up, his face twisted with anger. "How can you say this?" he demanded. "After all we've shared, all we've believed, how can you turn your back on us now?" The words cut through me, but I didn't flinch. Fear gnawed at me, but I couldn't stop. I had already seen the truth. There was no going back now. "I'm not turning my back on you," I said quietly. "I'm giving you the truth that I was blind to, but now I see.
Jesus is not a false prophet. He is the fulfillment of everything we've waited for. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some faces were filled with anger, others with confusion, and some with quiet tears. There were whispers of betrayal, of blasphemy, but there was also something else, a flicker of curiosity. The seeds of doubt were planted, and I could see it in their eyes. Would this truth divide us, or would it lead to a deeper understanding, a new path for all of us? And could I bear the consequences of what I had just started?